thoughts following up on the podcast from yesterday, where I talked about some of the initiations or some of the challenges we can get on the astral plane, which for most who go through the fourth cycle activation processes, they will at some point in their lives encounter the astral plane some way or another. In a way, we could say dreams are made of astral energy. So we are already highly infused with it, whether we remember our dreams or not. So part of the practice is, of course, to be able to access the astral plane and do it with a conscious mind and an observant mind that understands what we are dealing with when we are entering into the astral plane. It's like going into a land where, let's say, most people have accessed it throughout time via shamanic practices and used substances that have assisted them in getting there. And that's one of the reasons why the closest layer to our reality is highly infused with all sorts of weird beings, because the astral plane has a secret. And that secret is that the one that looks at the energies of the astral plane will interact with it, and by that begin to manifest what is in our emotional and mental fields. So see, as the astral plane is a kind of a mirror that mirrors back to us what we hold, and at the same time, it is also the plane where whatever we are unaware of that we have in our fields can have a field day, literally. So when we enter into the astral plane, it must be done with great knowledge. And we know the old school that try to do that. They created rings around themselves, white spheres around themselves, and all of these protective mechanisms that do assist to a degree, but very quickly turns into what we could call magic. And if you begin doing that on the astral plane, well, then you get into another subfield where the good old schooled magicians, going all the way back to Atlantis, reside. And that's only for the ones that really knows what they're dealing with. Otherwise, they can get quickly entangled in entities that are stronger than they are. So hence, those of us who are working energetically and trying to clear our fields, so we get through the history of distorted energies that our planet is under, that's the veil, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for us to reach the higher awareness, because of all the layers of all the civilizations that have been tampering with the original energetic fields of our reality field. Not many people talk about this, but that is a known fact amongst the true practitioners, that dangers lurk at every corner of our inner journey. To add in, when we say just the traditional Buddhist thoughts or the Theravada ideas, and you look at the suttas, you will see that there are these counter forces are often referred to as kind of one being, Mara. And it is interesting that Mara is also very similar to Maya, and Maya means literally distortion. So it also means Mar, which means ocean in different languages. So we have the similarity in the word M-A-R-A. That's the the Buddhist version. But if we go with French, M-A-R-E means ocean. Anyway, so we are having the plane of illusion, and that's the astral plane. So that's the first step. But it's also important to understand that astral actually comes from Latin and means shining. So everything that comes there has a tendency to shine, to lure. And we are like the magpie that get very drawn to everything that shines and wants to get our little paws on it. And that's not always the best approach. Not that we are to go for things that are dark and murky. That's not what I'm saying. That's an opposition. But we are to be aware of trickery, manipulation, deception, and all of the different layers of, we could say the astral plane has a tone of selfishness. That's perhaps a good way to put it. So if we kind of understand that when we go in there, it's good to have a kind heart. First, meet whatever we meet with understanding. And when I say compassion, many people kind of think, oh, then I have to have all of this compassion and be the best version of myself. And yes, we always have to be that. But it is more accurate to say in a harmonious, balanced way. And that goes both with principle 1, what you send out, so to speak. That's principle 2. What you send out will reflect back to you. That's principle 4 as well. But what you are will be what you see, so to speak. And if we are balanced, then the energies around us will be balanced. Principle 1 is what you can be, everybody else can be. And I'm just rephrasing them here for the sake of being less religiously connected, so we don't get infused or confused with some of the sayings. But they are all sayings, and we find them in most religions because there's a reason for it. That what has been turned into religion used to be the mystery school's way of teaching us how to approach the other dimension so that we could liberate ourselves from rebirths. And they have been tampered with and always informs the latest version, of course, Christianity, that does not have any inclinations and understandings of rebirth other than going to heaven or hell. So there are only 2 exit routes there, which is, of course, is inaccurate. But there are reasons for that goes with forgotten teachings, that goes with Sumeria, that had 7 heavens and 7 underworlds. So that meant there are actually 7 layers below and 7 layers above. And as we talked about, some other teachings have 4 layers below and a number of layers above, and it all is different. And why is it different? It is different because in the beginning of time, there were 12 lineages that had 12 different types of genetics that would develop 12 different types of consciousness, that would work with 12 different ways of energy to transform, modify, upgrade the reality field sections as they were allotted in the earliest time, in the dawn of time, where consciousness was embedded into the reality fields to develop, progress, and evolve for the highest good of the many. I know I got my story voice on there, but you, the storyteller voice, but you got the gist, because that is what it is. And that's why we have the different teachings. They are the watered out, distorted version of these different lineages. Of course, we had the timeline event that changed everything, and the colonization 15,000 years ago. So we take that into consideration as well. When we work on the astral plane, do we have to go through the astral plane? It would not be correct if I said you don't have to, because as far as I know, and I could be wrong, most people, due to the ancestry we have, unless you're one of the new kids on the block, and that means you're a hybrid and you don't belong to the system. But those of us who do belong to this system, we go so far back that we can say we are probably most likely entangled into the misuse and abuse of the energies of our reality field, originally trying to transform and upgrade and evolve the energies of the previous cycle with an open mind and an open heart, or with the kindness, harmonious and balanced, that is the correct way, where we were aware of our energy fields and how they would impact others and reality. Today, we have got 3 artificial fields: the biofield, which technically is the original one, but it's highly re-engineered. The emotional field, which is a lower version of the original astral plane and the 4th dimension. And technically, the astral plane is a buffer zone between our emotional field and the 4th dimension. So it's part of what we call the astral barrier that was made when we got colonized. But the content of it is our own doing. So it's a field that was put in that would literally block us, like the ozone layer, block us from the harmful radiation, quote unquote, from the fourth dimension, meaning that we would activate and get our full skill sets back if we got in contact with the fourth dimension. And then the fourth dimension was sold off and traded off to a large group of insectoid and avian races. And as you know, I talked about how some of the brotherhoods, which mainly are mammal avians, had subdivisions that were trying to assist people through the astral plane and get in contact with them in their allotment in the fourth dimension. Most of these groups are no longer there, unfortunately, because they have regressed, and a lot of them, they got a little bit too entangled with different groups that made promises to them that they couldn't keep, and before they knew of it, they were in a trade-off of genetics and providing genetics for these groups to maintain themselves and keep themselves functional. This is mainly the CRNA. And the CRNAs started as part of the reseeding in the fourth cycle to assist us remembering what we truly were and assist us through the different layers of distortion that had made it more difficult for us to activate our true potentials, as happened after the timeline event and the distortion and disintegration of the original reality field technologies. They were supposed to help us along with the Pleiadians, but they pushed out the Pleiadians for various reasons and purposes. One was the obvious that the Pleiadian system fell under the control of the Orion system, and then it was difficult to know who you could trust and who you could not trust. Some of the Pleiadians went to the Draco system and got infused with Raptoid genetics, and others succumbed to the Orions and were captured and were used as Trojan horses to get into the systems that they priorly had been the beneficiary of and been assisting in upgrading and developing these reality fields to a higher stand of knowledge and civilization. So we have implications in this, and that's why it's not clear-cut when we talk about going into the astral plane. That's where the history of our system is needed. Because we need to go in with an open mind and an open heart and an open understanding of what it is. That means we don't have our precog or a predetermined, this is what I think it is. But we go in and say, I know this is unknown territory. I know this will be full of challenges that will be suitable and mirror my energy field. That's the first most important step. So that when you do go in with this mindset that tells you whatever you will see will to some degree go under the laws of energetic and genetic affinity. But there are also, what we could say, there's so much there. It's like going into a junkyard. You know, you might find gold or treasures or something you can recycle, but most of it is of absolutely no use because others have trashed it completely. But you still have to go through all of the piles and you say, well, why should I do that? I can just buy something new. Yeah, good, you do that. But the junkyard is our past. And for those of us who want to move into the future, we need to let go of the anchor points that ties us to the past timelines. And that's why for some, not for all, it is necessary to go into the astral plane. And that's why I'm making this little podcast about that. What we will encounter there to a large degree will be our own creations, whether it's from wrongful use of energy and consciousness in previous lifetimes, and that means back then when we actually was in contact with the fourth dimension, or it's due to the timeline event that disconfigured and crystallized a lot of energies, or it's due to genetic fragmentation of different species that used to be here, that used to be our colleagues, and by that have a vague memory of us, and hence are drawn to our energy field, because when we enter into a new field, whatever is in alignment or we have been in contact with or is part of our history will pop up. So we can clear and undo the past. And undo means to balance it and if need be, dissolve it and disintegrate it or elevate it to its highest possibilities. And I talk about the fourth dimensional opposition dynamics in the transition sciences, how we learn to work with the oppositions to transform them either to a new highest potential as they originally was made to, or to disintegrate it entirely because there's nothing left there. There's no viability rate. That means there are no viable genetics. There's only distorted energy. And that's like a pile of junk. You can't use it for anything. So the best way to get around it is to disintegrate it, and then it can turn into dust, and then it has its own route where it can be reused for some of the later phases of the third cycle, which we technically are in, where dust turns into stars and then go through their own processes and eventually blast and becomes a black hole. And that's the natural state of energy eventually, as it gathers in very large patterns so that it can comprise itself to the raw energy and then become what we see as a black hole, which is inaccurate because it's not black. It's actually a high compressed area of what's left of the original third cycle energies. That cannot be reused for anything until the entire universal cycles, all of them, including the entire third cycle, has reached that point where everything is that highly compressed type of energy, aka black holes that melt together and become one big black hole, or one big, very high compressed energy field that will then either scatter into absolute nothingness as explode and implode and cease to exist, or due to the high amount of energy, because that's what happens when the energy gets too high and there is no further progression for it. It must either cease to exist or it must transform into something entirely new. And that's part of the dustification processes that will lead to that. There will be no consciousness. That will only be energy. And energy in itself cannot generate consciousness. It can generate a type of intelligence. That means it has an information patterns that appears to be conscious, that appears to be knowledgeable of what it's doing, but it's actually just the information system that all energy units hold. And these are part of the universal cycles. And I've talked about that both in my book, The Souls of Humanity, and explained some of this in my course material as well, why that is. But that's not so important because the universes, they continue to cycle in and out of each other. So there is no beginning, there is no end. So trying to go back to the beginning is kind of a pointless exercise that the brain needs because it thinks in linear ways. So also why it's important to understand that both the emotional field has a type of intelligence that wants to follow the pattern of its engineering, and so does the mind. And if the ego plays along with these two types of fields and their coding, well, then there's harmony. But if true consciousness potentials from the original holographic energetic architecture begins to descend, or energetic entities find it to be of use to activate certain levels in our emotional field, then the first step is the astral plane. And that's where we will then say we have now entered into the different valleys. That means the valley of death, the valley of the burning ground, the valley of the non-existing beings, and all of these different valleys, all depending on your genetic structure that goes with the original lineages. Hence, it is important to know which lineage we belong to. Do I know which lineage I belong to? In a way, but it's only glimpses. It could be later on. This doesn't have to be the original one. So how we work with this is actually to rediscover our core values. And that's the highest trinity that goes with the will, the vow, and the wisdom. And that is only achieved when we work through our inner landscape of the different fields and what they hold of entities, and acknowledge that everything we will see will be a reflection of who and what we have become, and who and what we used to be, and who and what we can transform ourselves into be. Of course, at some point we will go from our own sphere and our own inner landscape to go into the collective, where we join others, where we begin to see what they hold and they begin to see what we hold. And then we have to learn to work as oppositions, as in how do we then generate teamwork here with this higher capacity of awareness? How do we learn to deal with each other's shadows and entities and what is there, because they will go into what we could call a little bit of a competition with each other. Let me put it mildly. You can also go into something much, much far worse, but it's that's part of the journey too. So the first step is, of course, that we learn to understand the astral plane on our own and what's there, so that we understand what is in others. And that also goes with treat others like you would be or wish to be treated yourself. Be met with kindness and understanding as you would like to meet others and you yourself with kindness and understanding. And in that, understand that we are in a difficult journey, all of us. So the training ground is the astral plane. Of course, those of us who go there, we should, if we were to do it by the book, have gone through psychological processes first and have gone through intensive psychotherapeutic processes, so we are fully aware of who and what we are. We know our weak points, our strengths, our weaknesses, our trauma, our defense mechanisms. So we know how we respond when we are put into stressful situations or unknowns, or something triggers some of the wounds that most of us carry in our emotional field. But that's not always the case. So with the activation processes and the astral barrier that broke down finally in 2016, and the CRNA brotherhoods began to collapse, and most of what they had were handed over to the scavengers, then things were playing out in an unpleasant way where things were randomly activating here and there. And from 2016 to 2020, for those of us who was aware, that was a challenging time. Then we had the pandemic and things kind of got calmed down for a very specific reason. And I'm not saying more because then I'll get into trouble. But put 2 and 2 together and you will understand why 70% of the Earth population were pushed and ushered into doing what they did under the guise of a specific idea that would prevent them from achieving something else that was entirely and very fear-provoking, and were connected to the foundational fear most people have of the final transition. Okay, so that's where we are now. So the astral plane is not what it used to be anymore. There are new cubes there. It doesn't work as it used in the old days. So in a way, when we talk about using the old teaching systems to get there, such as the esoterics, that means the Blavatsky, Alice A. Bailey, and that group, the Golden Dawn, and what was there in the 18 and 1900. Well, they are not, or was it the 19 and the 20s? Can't remember. Bear with me. Blavatsky came in 1800 something and died in the early 1900 something. Bailey was in the early 1900 something and died in 1959 or something. So again, is it centuries or is it hundreds? I always miss this up. It's okay. It's just some constructs of human paradigms are just illogical. And if they are illogical, then my mind just can't remember it. It just makes sense, so I can't remember it. And then it's just to be repetition, and I'm never good at repeating things and being a parrot. My brain doesn't work that way. It wants to have the purpose and function of things, and if there is no purpose and function, then my brain doesn't remember it. It's like it doesn't compute it. It's like, I don't get this. It has no purpose, so why even bother with it? It's just noise. It's distortion. It's human made-up belief systems that goes with specific type of brain, and my brain's not that way, so I don't need to work with it that way. So that's how my brain works, and that's part of the original genetics. Because it's all about energy, and the mind field is supposed to process different levels of energies that will then be put into different forms of information systems that can then be computed and linked up to different forms of either teaching systems or cube systems or different types of programs that were there to assist us in our progression work. So that was, of course, taken out and turned into 5 fields that were then highly controlled by different forms of mental processes and belief systems and constructions and sciences and whatnot. All of these artificial means to control the neural network in linear processes and paradigms of science that they appear to be. That's the understanding of the world. Yes, only on the frequency spectrum that aligns with the frequency energies of the brain. But if you want to feed the brain with the original holographic energetic structures, you need to move it into density energies. And to be able to activate that, you have to go through the activation of the heart, and the heart goes through the psychological processes, into the subconscious processes, into the astral plane, and then into the 4th dimension. And then you really kickstart the heart. So the practice here, as it always has been in the astral plane, is to meet things in a harmonious and balanced way, because we know what we will see is a mirror of who and what we are. How did I understand that? Because I had forgotten it. Well, I remember the dream that told me that. I'm on an ocean. And it's it's this vast ocean, and I'm on the what you call the beach, and I'm looking at that ocean, and it's kind of a murky, dark, very, very, in a way, scary environment, but it more feels polluted, as if you go to a swamp and you've got all sorts of weird things in the water. You don't know what it is. Bones are sticking up here and there, and weird monsters lurking beneath the surface of the water, murky, muddy, browny, smelly, bubbly kind of water. And I'm standing there, and I know I have to cross that ocean. And that's actually a test. That's an astral plane test. But I got it in my dreams. So at that time, I was already beginning the process, although unconsciously, because I was in my dream state. But I remember in my dream, I was thinking, okay, how do I cross this? I know I have to cross this. So how do I cross it? So I first look at, there are little stones or rocks in this muddy water thing. Okay, I can jump from one stone to another, find dry spots. And I get more or less half the way out into this weird, muddy, horrible, monster-infested ocean. And then the rock stops, and I'm out there in the middle of nowhere, and then I say, okay, I better go back. But the rocks are gone, so now I'm stuck out there in the middle of the monster sea, and everything is like in the old days, they had the parts of the earth that they didn't know of. They said monsters were living there, right? The unknown is always full of monsters. So I was there on that very, very unknown spot, and I began to see how the rock that I was on was beginning to sink into the water, and panic arose. And I think, okay, that's it. I can't fly. I can't swim in this. I'll be eaten. And so what other options do I have? And I then noticed that the more panic I got, the more roaring and wild the ocean became. It's like the monsters, they grew with my fear. They became big and large and rah! I was just kind of, okay, feedback loop in, fight and flight, nowhere to go. So just more and more brown back moment there. So, and then there's something that dawned on me, that because I noticed it, this is about noticing what's going on in the middle of all of your emotional responses. It's kind of that's why the mind kicks in and says, okay, I got this. I am interpreting this energy. Come on, I'm computing it. I am processing it as quickly as I can. If you just calm down a little bit so I can figure out what's going on here. And that's why the frontal lobe really kicks in. And that's why doing the psychological work is really, really good, because you learn to become the observer. That means the frontal lobes, instead of just being the strategizing level of you that keeps you in check and makes you conform to society so you don't act in ways that nobody likes, as if you were in a 13-year-old in your limbic system, just acting out your teenage trauma, whatnot. The frontal lobe kicks in and makes sure you behave and you are a nice citizen inside the society. But that can be changed into the observer point as well, because it is observing already. So instead of just keeping you contained and conformed, then it can actually process information, and it links up to, as we know, the third eye, right? So that's the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobes can actually go up a higher type of vibration, where it really begins to monitor the fields of the brain and begins to say, okay, now I resource allocate. Now I'm going to that network and that network and that network, and I put things together so I find a solution. Again, solution-based. And we should, of course, be aware not to get too solution-based, because then we overlook our emotional needs as just being met and seen and heard and feel okay and feel the balance, because the balance point and the harmonious energies are in the limbic system. That's why we train when we train harmony. We train the limbic system to be calm. But the frontal lobes, that's the observer point that goes in with the higher awareness that will then kick in once that is trained to its right position, whereas the instinctual layer, of course, is connected to the biofield and the body processes themselves, which will later on, once we develop the limbic system into the harmonious balance system that kickstarts the past life memories, that goes from the hypothalamus, but that only kicks in when the frontal lobe system is working as it's supposed to. So there are pathways to achieve these knowledge driven energy fields that are connected to different areas of our brain. So while I was at that ocean, I was just thinking, wow, I need to calm down. And then I just began breathing, and at that point I had already kind of, not fully, but I just got this, I need to calm down. I need to get into that place where my heart is calm and where it becomes like a sun. And then I just took all of my thought process away from my brain, and I just went into my heart, and in kindness made it the kind sun, we could call it that, radiating with kindness. And the rock stopped falling, going deeper and deeper. It stopped. And then the ocean just became calm. All the monsters, the noises, everything just dissipated while I was just standing there focusing on my heart as the sun that were radiating kindness. And I just felt how that warmth went into all of my cells. It went all to all of my limbs, my feet, my legs, my torso, my arms, my head. Everything just became this kind, radiating sun of kindness and calm and harmony and ease. And I just felt how that my entire field just completely calmed down. And the ocean around me calmed down as well. It was like the ocean and I then became one, and it responded to that energy, like the cells or the molecules of the ocean also got infused with that energy, and then just leveled out and became this beautiful, beautiful blue ocean. And the sky was no longer murky and dark and whatever. It just cleared up and became a beautiful, beautiful, golden infused sky. And I could then say, now I got this. This I know. This I have. This I know how to deal with. And then I literally began to walk on the water and walked across it. And you know that parable is actually in the Gospels as well, but it's not put correctly. It's highly distorted and very difficult to understand. But it is the understanding of the astral plane as the ocean. And it does mirror your emotions, and it does mirror your feels. So the litmus test in understanding how our heart can affect the astral plane is the ocean walking on the ocean. And that's where we can say, now I understand what the astral plane is about. Now I understand it is part of me. It is an extension of my heart field. And I, by my vibration and my energies, am in charge of, is this ocean going to be something that feels frightening and mirror back to me all the levels that I have not cleared? Or is it an extension where I show that I can turn it into its true purpose, the astral, the shining field that I now can walk through and go out to the other side of the ocean, where there actually is a gate that's like a huge vortex of light, where you then, by the walk on the water, walk into that vortex, and then you come across it, and on the other side, where you then begin the next level of your journey. So that's actually the very first initiation. That is where you learn to master the astral plane. So everything we see when we enter into the astral plane contemplation is a mirror of what we need to clear and transform and turn into harmonious energies. And that is, as you remember from the previous podcast, the first step of wisdom. And that is how to transform oppositions into the balance point, from where they can either elevate to higher forms of energy that will lead us to the next step of the journey and grant us more knowledge and wisdom. And wisdom is the correct use of energy and consciousness in the right form, in the right manner, at the right time, at the right place, with the right tools, and in the right moment, according to what is needed in that exact moment, in that specific point of existence, and in that exact type of energy that we then transform to either its highest forms of energy or evaporated where it ceased to exist, and by that no longer cause issues to ourselves, to others, or to reality. And that's a little bit extended version of what true wisdom is. So the astral plane is the first level that we work with. And for those who are a little bit more into the initiations, actually the very first part of the astral plane is what's called the burning ground. And that's where we move into the unknown, and everything we know will fall away. And if we want to return, we'll only discover that everything has burned and no longer exists. So that's what we could say, burning the old bridges to the base program and beginning like the full of the tarot card into the unknown, where we literally only have ourselves and what we have got with us of tools and what we have developed as part of our psychological journey and our own inner work as we have done so far. And after the burning ground, that's where you enter into the water initiation, the ocean that you have to learn to walk on the water. So you understand that everything must be turned into these bright, kind, harmonious energy units as part of that journey. So the first one is to overcome your fear. The next one is to learn to transform your fear. And the third one is, of course, where fear and emotions no longer are part of the journey, but where you learn to approach whatever's there with kindness, harmony, and a balanced viewpoint, where you observe and continue your processes of developing the third eye or the frontal lobes that you now have learned by the crossing of the ocean and the emotional, what we could say, developmental processes in the burning ground, learning to be comfortable in the unknown as an explorer of the unknown, and learning how to approach what comes your way as balanced as you can. It's okay to have emotions, it's okay to respond, but the frontal lobe should grow in strength so that it knows, I got this, I protect you. We will figure this one out because we survived the burning ground and we have gotten so far and we walked on water and we calmed down the monsters and everything that was there. So we got this. We got the most important tools here. And now the final step, the third layer of the observer, that then instead of being mechanical, rational, strategizing, begins to do the same thing with compassion. And that's technically the third test. But for now, I will leave that understanding that step one, the lineages determine what we will encounter on the astral plane, if we have any. If we are newcomers or sojourners and do not belong here, our journeys will look different. So I do talk to those who are part of the original solar system before the colonization. That's mainly my target group. But we are also the ones, along with the hybrids and the incomers and the newcomers and whatever's there, that are going to learn to figure out how to collaborate on the future timelines. Because we are, in this solar system, creating a completely new type of civilization. And that will demand that we do understand how to work with the unknown, how to work with the unexpected, how to meet things with kindness and try to create harmony, how to balance things so it doesn't go into what we call something that it shouldn't become, that turns into segregation and exclusion of other civilizations, but learn to work as teams and understand we have strengths and weaknesses, and how do we build bridges when it's needed, and when do we not build bridges when it's not needed. That's like walking on water. What to do, when to do, and how to do. So that's part of the training that we get there as well. And of course, the original intent of that was that from the get-go, when the timeline event hit us, our configuration changed into something that got more and more aligned with the third cycle. And that meant that more and more returned to selfish, territorial aspects of their previous selves and became more and more aggressive and more service to self. And hence this understanding of how to turn into balance and kindness and harmony, which often is translated into correct approach. That is the understanding that that's the foundation of the civilizations that used to be part of Earth and our solar system, because it is a hub and there used to and always been many races going through it, traveling through it, working here, visiting us, learning stuff and moving on. And that's the first step that we're going to return to. Alrighty, with that, I think I will end this little podcast. I think I've said what I wanted to say today. Thank you.